Welcome to our webinar today. The webinar today will be about half an hour, and we will be going over all of the new compensation features that we have in FCS Express. We've spent the last few months rewriting actually most of the user interface associated with compensation to make it easier to use based on a lot of customer feedback. So we're really glad to be able to show this off publicly for the first time. This functionality is available in FCS Express version 4.01 and greater. So if you start up your FCS Express and you don't see some of the things that I'm showing today, please go to our website and upgrade to the latest version. Just as a quick note, how do you get that upgrade? You go to our website at www.denovosoftware.com and you can download all downloads, and you can download the latest RUO or IVD version depending on what you're using. Okay, while I'm on the website, I did want to say that everything that I'm going to be showing today will be recorded, and it will be put on our recorded webinars webpage. The recorded webinars webpage can always be accessed from our main page over here, and we'll have the webinar recorded and posted on this page where you can play it at any time. So if you want to send a link or tell anybody about this webinar, feel free to just send them a link to this page. In addition, everything that I'm going to be showing is going to be available in our tutorials. Actually, this will be a briefer version than our tutorials. Our tutorials are more comprehensive. The tutorials are always available from the main menu if you go to Help Tutorials, and you can see here that it popped up and that we have a compensation tutorial available right over here. And as well, the tutorials are always available from our website. If you go to Support Tutorials, then you can see the tutorials on our website over there, and they come up as well. Okay, so without much further ado, let me get started over here. One of the things that didn't change about FCS Express is that the compensation settings are still by default loaded automatically from your data file. Okay, this is something that didn't change, but I want to point it out because it is something that some people don't know that they have the capability to control. By default, if you go to your edit preferences, the default setting looks like this. The default compensation to use is FCS file and then your compensation default. What that means is that when you load a new data file, if there's a compensation matrix in the FCS file itself, we will load that compensation matrix for you and apply it automatically. If there's not one in the FCS file, we will use the compensation default, which is something that I'll explain later on. You have a couple of extra choices here that people aren't aware of. If you pick none, then FCS Express will not load compensations automatically from the FCS file. So if you're going to actually make compensation on your own based on your own single stain controls and you don't want to use what's coming from the instrument, you'd want to change your settings here to none, so that you use what you've defined in the layout. Otherwise, as soon as you open a new data file, it will forget what you used in the, well, it won't forget, it won't use what you set up in the layout, it will use what's associated with the FCS file. And again, you could use only the compensation default or use the FCS file by itself, okay, without checking the compensation default afterwards. So this is an option that by most people just leave it on the default, but just wanted you to know that that's there. Okay, so, and I'll show that working in a moment. So what is brand new is the entire compensation user interface, and you find that user interface under the data section of the ribbon under compensations in the data info. And when you open up that compensation, you'll see that it's now a dockable window. You can move it around like all our other docked windows. Interesting, 1 second. And you can dock it to the side like you can with everything else. And that's a standard docking feature. We do have a webinar about docking and how to dock multiple things open. The cool thing about the docking is now you can keep your compensation settings open at all times. In previous versions of version 4 and in version 3, it was a modal dialog. So when you had your compensation window open, you couldn't do anything else. Now you can keep them open. You can see the compensation window is divided into 2 sections: loaded automatically with data files and created manually. There's nothing in them at the moment because we currently do not have any compensations loaded. We don't have any data loaded. But what this is all about is that any compensations that are loaded automatically with a data file will be put in the first section over here, and those compensation matrices are loaded and unloaded as well automatically. So if we go in here and we insert a dot plot and we go into here, you can see that as soon as I loaded that data file, there was a compensation appeared magically in this section at the top. And that's the compensation matrix that was loaded automatically with that data file. And you can see here that when I delete the last plot that's using the data file, the compensation went away. That compensation is no longer active. Okay, so those compensations are linked to the data and they load and unload themselves automatically as you load and unload data. Now, if you were to actually drag the compensation from the loaded automatically section to the created manually section, that means that that compensation matrix is now unlinked from the data and will stay open all the time. Again, that's a useful thing if you want to take a particular matrix from a data file and potentially modify it or keep it alive and apply it to other data files that had different matrices. You can drag it from the loaded automatically section and put it in the created manually section, and at that point it's really up to you when to delete that compensation and when to use it. It's not automatic anymore. Okay, so so that's a little bit about how the tree is organized, or the 2 different sections here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to our preferences, and since we're going to be building compensations automatically, I'm going to turn the preferences off so that we don't load the compensation from the data files any longer. Okay? And we'll be working in that mode for the rest of this webinar, since this webinar is about you manipulating and using your own compensation and your own setting up your own compensation, not simply using what came with the data file. Okay, so what I'm going to first do is show our manual compensation. So our manual compensation works pretty much the same as before. If I go to a plot here, this is uncompensated. You can see that it obviously needs some compensation. I'll actually change it to a density plot just so it looks a little bit nicer. You can see that this obviously needs some compensation. If you want to just do manual compensation, like in the old, kind of old way where you adjusted sliders on the instrument itself, you can do that in FCS Express. Simply right-click and go to compensation, and we can create a new compensation. We can give it a name, and I'll just call it test. You notice, before I do anything, that in this section over here, the created manually now has a plus next to it because the test section, the test compensation was put inside that created manually. And basically, this is very, very straightforward. You just adjust the sliders. As you adjust the sliders, the compensation will move in real time. And it will move as you move the compensation slider to the right in this direction. Then the compensation moves in the direction of the picture. Okay? So if you move it to the right now, the compensation is moving down. and if you move it to the right here, the compensation is going towards the y-axis. Okay, and of course you can undercompensate and overcompensate. Now this is, you can see how fast it is. This is happening in real time, and we are, it works fairly quickly. If you don't want to see an automatic preview of your changes, you can turn off the automatic preview button. You can see now I'm moving the slider and nothing's happening, but when I press preview, it adjusts to the state that it's supposed to be. Okay, so most of the time people leave automatic preview on so they can see what they're doing as they adjust the sliders. Now, adjusting the sliders is obviously not the recommended way of doing compensation, but it is a great way of teaching people about compensation and what data looks like if you overcompensate and undercompensate, to sort of illustrate so that when they see it in their real data, they can recognize it. Okay? So any questions, of course, please feel free to ask, to type the questions in the question and answer section. We'll be glad to answer anything you want. To go into now a little bit about this new Navigator, you can see that I opened up the created manually section, and the test compensation that I just made is in there. You can see that it's marked as the default. If I right-click on any compensation, I can set it as the default. Okay, so you can, that's what, when I talked earlier about try to use something in the FCS file, otherwise use the compensation default, you can just by set whatever matrix you want to be the default just by right-clicking on it. Okay, so let's look a little bit about now at the bottom part of the screen. Once I've set up a compensation, there's 3 tabs. Once you click on a compensation, there's 3 tabs that are on the bottom that tell you about that compensation. You can see the compensation matrix, you can see the spillover matrix, and you can see the automatic compensation setup. We're going to go to the automatic compensation setup later, but to show a little bit about the individual matrices, you can see here that because we did it manually, you can see here we're now subtracting 20% of PCA, 20% of PC7 is being subtracted from PEA, and vice versa. You can see the spillover matrix. Normally, the diagonals of the spillover matrix are 1. The reason they're not 1 when you do the manual compensation like we did is that we're adjusting the sliders. We're actually adjusting the compensation matrix directly, not adjusting the spillover matrix. Okay, and if you don't know the difference between that, it's not important for now. You know, feel free to write us an email or something and we can explain the difference between that. One thing I would like to point out is that the matrices can be displayed in a grid form or in a form like some other software displays it in a list, where you have percent of fluorochrome 1 minus percent of the other fluorochrome. Okay? So whichever way you prefer to see it, you can see it in a matrix view or in a list view. In any way, you can just simply type in values in here, and this is both with data that you've, the compensation that you've created manually as well as automatically. Later on, I'll show you how to do that. But any way you've created a matrix, if I type in 0.5 in here, you can see that the plot updated, and if I type in 0.2 here, you can see that the plot updated right away. Okay, so you can actually adjust any of the matrix coefficients that you want, and it will adjust the plots and the data in real time. Okay? So I'll pause for a moment. Does anyone have any questions about what I've shown so far? Okay, once again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the question and answer section at the bottom of your control panel. Before I go on to automatic compensation, just a little bit more about this form. On the form here, you can do a bunch of things. You can right-click. You can rename a compensation here. So if I didn't want to call it test, I could call it hello. And you can see here that it's now called hello. So you can rename your compensations, and I'll talk a little bit later about saving them and applying them to files and whatnot. Okay, so but this form is quite handy. If you have multiple compensations in here, you can actually copy a matrix and paste it. You can drag them onto plots. I'll be showing that later, and do a bunch of other things. Okay. And of course, you can delete them. If I want to delete the matrix, I just highlight it and press delete. And you notice that when I deleted it, the plot went back to its uncompensated form. Okay, because of course the compensation matrix that the plot was using no longer exists. All right. So now that we've gone through manual compensation a little bit, let's go through automatic compensation. And the new wizard dramatically speeds up how you can do automatic compensation. And I'll show an example here. So the first thing to do to create your own compensation matrix is to click the plus button here to create a new compensation. And you notice if I just hover the mouse over it, a little hint appears. And I'm going to call this my auto comp. Okay? And you notice when you create your own compensation, the first tab that by default appears is the automatic compensation wizard. And you'll see the wizard is very quick to go through and set up your own comp, much quicker than it was in previous versions of version 4 and in version 3. So we've organized it as in a handy step-by-step approach. Steps 1 and steps 2 are mandatory to go through, and step 5. Step 3 and 4 are optional steps that allow you to do some fine-tuning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the mandatory steps first and just show you how quickly you can set up your compensation, and then I'll show some more advanced features showing how to fine-tune it in different ways if you want to. Okay, so step number 1 is to select your single stained controls, and all you have to do here is click the plus and go to my your compensation controls and add them. And then what you have to do is for every compensation control, choose which fluorochrome that control that file is the control for. So this is the control for APC. So we just pick APC from the list. This is the control for FitC. This is the control for PC5. This is the control for PC7. This is the control for PE. And we also have the option, this is an unstained, we have the option at the bottom of the list will be an option to assign a file as a universal negative. You don't have to choose a universal negative. If you haven't identified any of the data files as a universal negative, it will allow you to pick a negative from every single tube. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. So once we fix step number 1, we go to step number 2, where we build histograms. In this section here, if there were any errors in step number 1, the errors would come up in the messages dialog. Right now there's no errors, so it says we're ready to go. But we do quite a bit of error checking to make sure that you've actually picked files that are appropriate for doing automatic compensation. What we do when we build histograms is now we actually build the plots for you that you need in order to do your automatic compensation. Okay? In previous versions of FCS Express, you had to build these plots on your own. Now we build them for you. So the first plot is just a forward scatter by, this is forward scatter's area by height. It's just the first 2 parameters in your data file that allow you to choose a basic gate to use for your subsequent compensation controls. You can change this gate later and do whatever you want with it. I'll show that in a little bit. But for now, I'm just going to use the gate that's there, and I'm going to move it over to the population that I'm interested in here. Okay? So once we've set our basic gate, you can see that FCS Express created a bunch of pages. Okay? It created 1 page for the scatter gate, and then 1 page each for all of the single stained controls you made. So all you have to do is flip through the pages, and you can see that we already created a positive and a negative plot for you on that particular channel, and we've used some cluster detection algorithms to position the markers in what basically should be the correct position. Sometimes the clustering doesn't always work, as it doesn't in the negative control here. It is actually working, it's just somewhat sensitive to noise, and it detected that this little peak at the bottom was actually its own cluster. So we just have to widen that a little bit to say this is what we want to use for the negatives. So you just flip through all of your plots. You can see that this one, it actually did fairly well. We don't have to make any adjustments. For the PC5, you know, again, you can choose what you want for your unstained controls, unstained population. I'm going to put that there. And you notice, just to go through quickly, that the top plot in every on everyone here is from the control, and the bottom plot is from the universal negative that you set up. Okay, so it automatically chose the same parameter from the universal negative and from your positive control, and so you don't have to do anything. Okay, so you just flip through, check to make sure your markers are in the spots that you want to use them for. I'll make this one a little bit wider here. I'll go to my PE. Again, I'll make this one a little bit wider here. I don't think my gating is right in the best spot to actually be doing this experiment, but I'm not super familiar with this data, so, and it's not really that important, so I didn't fine-tune it. But you can do, normally, of course, you'd have a much narrower, unstained control. Okay, so we've done the first two steps. We've made our scatter gate, and we've gone through and made our controls. The last thing we have to do is calculate the matrices. You can choose if you want to calculate your matrices based on the mean or the median of the various populations. Median is the default. You just click Calculate Matrices, and then we're done. Okay, the compensation matrix and the spillover matrix is set up for you already. You can see here's the spillover matrix. There's one on all of the diagonal elements, as you would expect when doing automatic compensation, and then all of the spillover coefficients have been calculated for us, and then compensation matrix, of course, is the inverse of the spillover. We did get a question, why are we not adjusting the marker for our stained controls? The only reason I didn't is because they're fine for our purposes. If we wanted to adjust them, for instance, if you thought this really should be bigger, you know, you can adjust them and do that there. Normally, you kind of want to take the brightest of your cells from the positive population. So I just left it as that, but it's really up to you to do whatever you want. Okay? And so you can see here that in a few clicks, we actually just created our matrix. Okay, now to show that again and what it takes in real time without me explaining every single step of the way, I'm going to close the layout and just go through it quickly so that you can see really what's going on. So basically, once again, to reiterate, you create your new compensation, select your single stain controls, apply the settings, or assign it to a parameter. So APC, FitC, PC5, PC7, PE, and my universal negative, of course. Build my histograms, adjust my gate, and just go through and adjust my markers. FitC is pretty good. PC5, I'll change a little bit. PC7, PEA, I'll change that one a little bit. And then calculate the matrices, and we're done. Okay, so you can see a much quicker process than it was in previous version 4s and in version 3, of course. So how do you now that we've made a compensation matrix, how do we apply it to different layouts? How do we apply it to different data files? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a plot now from a stained control, and I'm going to change this to my all colors. And let me change to a parameter. So how do I then apply this matrix to a particular set of data? Well, you can do that in the same way that you did it before. You could right-click on the plot and go to Format, and on the Overlays tab, you can change the compensation and select the new compensation that you just made. And when you did that, you can see that the compensation is applied. Okay, and the data looks really good. Again, this is a minor point that people may not realize all the time, is even with compensation that came from an FCS file that looks like it's always applied to your data, you can always turn your compensation off on any particular plot just by right-clicking on the plot, going to Format, and turning the compensation back to none. When you do that, you'll see this is what the uncompensated data looks like if I press the preview button, and this is the compensation button. Okay? Of course, if you want to apply it to multiple plots at the same time, you can multi-select. I don't have multiple plots here, but you can, oh, I'll do it. Let me turn this off. Okay, and let me duplicate this plot, and I'll shrink it a little bit. So let's say that I had two plots here, and I wanted to apply compensation to both plots at the same time. I can just select them both, go to my Format tab, go to Overlays, and apply the compensation to both plots at the same time. Okay, and of course you can do this if you have 100 plots at the same time. You know, it will work for all of them. Okay, so that was available in previous versions of FCS Express. One of the new things that we did that's pretty cool is that you can actually just take this compensation and drag it onto a plot, and when you drag it onto a plot, it applies that compensation to the plot. Okay, so that's another neat feature that we have. Okay, so and one of the other thing you can do, you can actually copy this compensation. If you were to copy it to the clipboard, you can copy it and then you could paste it into another layout and then use it in that other layout. Okay, so you can certainly do that. You could actually take this compensation that you created and save it. And when you save it to a compensation file, it could then be loaded into another layout by going to the load button. Okay, so typically what happens is people have a layout where they make the compensation like we did now, save it to disk in some way, one of the ways that I described, and then they load it into layouts where they want to use it. Okay. So you can load that in. So if you have a layout with patient samples or something, you could load that compensation layout into the layout that has the samples or into anything else. The other things that we can do is you can actually assign this compensation to a data file or to a group of data files. So if I assign this to a data file, I'm going to assign it to this file over here. Okay, and let me explain what actually just happened. What actually just happened is that in Windows, we made a new file that has the same name as the original file with a .compensation extension. Okay? What that means now is that in the future, if you ever load up this original file over here, if you just load it from FCS Express, FCS Express will automatically detect that there's a compensation file that you want to use with that particular data file. Okay? So that's a really easy way. We don't actually alter the original data. The original data stays the same way that it is, but we add this extra file to the folder, and from your point of view, it's all invisible. As soon as you load up this data file here, FCS Express will load up the compensation for you. Now, one of the things that you can also do with a slight change is if you take this data file and you rename it as .all compensation, and we can call this my whatever, apoptosis .all compensation. what FCS Express will do is any data file that's in the same folder as this all compensation file will be loaded with that data file. So for instance, if I copy this file and put it in here, you notice now I have an all compensation file. When any of these data files are loaded within FCS Express, instead of whatever compensation is with that file, we will use the all compensation file we have there. Okay? So it's very, very easy to create a compensation, save it to disk, call it an all compensation file, and just put that file in any folder with your data, and FCS Express, when you load that data, will use the compensation matrix that you made. Okay? And you can call them whatever you want. You can call it apoptosis.allcompensation. You can call it apoptosis December 15th.allcompensation. The name doesn't really matter. Of course, you should only have one all compensation file in any folder. If you have more than one, FCS Express just chooses the first one. Okay? So it's much, much easier now to take a compensation that you made and apply it to any data files that you want, simply by saving it as an all compensation file and sticking it in the folder with the data that you want to use. Okay? So any questions on that so far before I go to some more advanced functionality? If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in. Okay, so I'm going to set up my compensation again from the beginning and make some adjustments to it that I didn't make the last time. So once again, to just go through the process very quickly, since it's fairly straightforward. I haven't even saved a layout. I'm just going to set it up from the beginning. So APC, FTSE, PC5, PC7, PE, and my unstained control. This is my universal negative. And now I'm going to go build my histograms. And let's say I don't like that. Well, one thing that I'll point out over here, let me use a new feature of FCS Express that where I can view two pages at the same time. And let's look at my APC control page. Notice that as I move the scatter gate, the position of my marker is, should be updating. Okay, so these are auto-detecting markers, and they should be updating. They are actually updating just slightly. It's just that the noise is not making it visible. No. So I just pointed out that I had a mistake here, and I picked side scatter for FTSE by accident. So here's actually another point I'll bring up. Let's say you did make a mistake and you want to recreate your histograms. You can just make your change like I did, go to FTSE, and click Build Histograms again, and it will say, do you want to delete the layout pages and gates that you previously created? And you can say yes. And then what it did is it deleted all of the previous pages, and it recreated your controls. So you don't have to worry that you made any mistakes or anything like that. If you want to change anything, you just click Build Histograms again. It will remove everything you did before. Okay? So all of these plots on the subsequent pages are gated on the scatter gate that's on the first page. So what if you don't like the scatter gate? You can see here the first two parameters are forward scatter area and height. What if I wanted that this should be on forward scatter area versus side scatter area? Well, simply change your parameters, draw a new gate, let's say over here, and instead of creating a new gate, replace the existing scatter gate. Okay? By replacing the existing scatter gate, all of the other plots were gated on the existing scatter gate, and you can see that first of all, the population is much cleaner, and they all changed appropriately. Okay, so since, again, the gating hierarchy shows that we have here, that we have the scatter gate and we have all of our other gates that were automatically made for us. So simply replacing the scatter gate allows us to use any gate we like. And in fact, if we wanted to make a more complicated gate, let's say I also wanted a gate not only on forward scatter area, I wanted a gate on side scatter height versus forward scatter area. And I'm going to apply my scatter gate to that. And then let's say that of those cells, I also wanted only these cells here to be used. So I'll call this my second scatter gate. Okay, and I'm going to make my scatter gate a child of my second scatter gate. So you can see here now that still everything will work fine because all of the gates that we had are children of the scatter gate, which is now a child of the second scatter gate, and all of the plots on the other pages are gated on the scatter gate. And so since the scatter gate is now a child of the second scatter gate, they'll still all be updated based on the second scatter gate. Okay, so I'm not going to go over how gating hierarchies work and stuff. If you don't know how gating hierarchies work and what I just showed doesn't seem to make much sense to you, please see our gating webinar or see our tutorials on gating and gating hierarchies, and that will make a lot more sense. But you really have, after the histograms are built, before you calculate the matrices, you have the flexibility to adjust your gates in any way that you want. Okay? And of course, you can recalculate the matrices as many times as you like. So if I calculated my matrices here and I got certain values and I said, you know what, for some reason they don't look nice, my scatter gate should have been here, you can move your scatter gate and recalculate the matrices and they'll be calculated again. Okay? Some of the other tabs that are sometimes useful is the add extra spillover targets. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to calculate the spillover into a channel that you actually didn't have a single color control for. So let's say I didn't have a single color control for PTR, which I don't. I can tick this off, and what FCS Express will do is calculate the spillover into the PTR channel even though there was no fluorochrome in the PTR channel. And what will happen when you do that is when I recalculate the matrices, is you can see that there's a PTR channel with all zeros on the source axis because there is no, we'll look here, there is no PTR over here. So it's not, PTR is not spilling into any channels, but if you look in this column over here, in the PTR column, you can see that we're actually calculating the spillover coefficients of everything else into the PTR channel. Okay, and this is used for you for information only if you are considering adding PTR into this experiment in the future and you want to know what the spillover from the other channels into PTR or anything is, you can get that without having a single stain control in the PTR channel. Okay? And the last advanced function that I wanted to show is how to adjust your matrices so that if you don't want to use the default marker that we created. So for instance, let's go to our FitC control, and this is our FitC stained and our FitC unstained. And let's say I say, you know, I don't want to use a histogram for my positive control for my FitC stained. For whatever reason, I want to use a dot plot for my FitC stained control. Okay, so what I can do is I can insert a dot plot. You can see it's got my FitC stained control, and I'm going to say I want to use FitC versus PE, and I'm going to gate this on my scatter gate. Okay, and for my FitC positive population, I actually only want to use this section here for whatever reason. So of course what we are using by default by using the marker gate is we're using the entire population here, but you say I only want to use this bottom part. Well, all you have to do is make sure that the gate that you made, this new gate 1, is in the correct position in the hierarchy. So I'm going to put it as a child of the scatter gate. And then what I can do is just drag this gate 1 onto my FTSE stained control cell over here. So you should be able to see that I'm now holding the mouse over the FTSE stained control. It's currently coming from plot 16 overlay 1. As soon as I let go of the mouse, it now changed to plot 26 gate 1. Okay, so we just changed by just simply dragging a gate onto this adjust parameter section. We changed what we're using as the positive population for that control. And then, of course, if I just rebuild the matrices, it will now use the value in the gate, not the value in the not the value that we had before, not from the marker. Okay, another small point. And another cool thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that actually what you can do now is if you have a text box somewhere on your page, you can actually drag the compensation matrix. You can drag the compensation matrix into the text box, and you'll see that it will create the compensation matrix for you, showing all of the coefficients. And if you want to, you can also drag the spillover matrix into a text box. And, ooh, interesting. All right, so there's a little bug here, but we'll figure that out. But you can also drag the spillover matrix into the text box, and it will show that as well. Okay. If you want to export any of these to Excel, you can then simply select one of these in the text box, copy it to the clipboard, and paste it. Of course, and you can use our tokens and our batch processing to export the individual matrix elements as part of a batch. So if you want to batch through different sets of single stain controls over time, or you can simply just copy and paste, whatever works. Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, I'll stay on the line here for a minute or two more to answer any questions. But I did want to reiterate that I hope that you guys, I showed a lot of advanced details that are in step 3 and step 4 towards the end that are rarely used, only by really advanced users. But the very basics of, just to recap, picking your single stain controls and assigning them to a parameter, building your histograms, and then calculating the matrices is very, very straightforward and much, much quicker than it was previously. Again, all of this functionality is detailed both in the tutorials and in the FCS Express manual itself. We have both our printed version of our manual, and actually in the help system, you can just go to the compensation section, which is located over here, and it shows all of everything that I talked about. It describes it in detail. Okay? And once again, everything will be recorded and posted on our website at denovosoftware.com in the recorded webinars section. Okay? So if anybody has any questions, feel free to type them in. Aside from that, thank you very, very much for attending today. We really appreciate you taking the time. We hope that you enjoy the new features. And of course, this is a very brand new functionality and has a lot of new stuff in it. And if you have any suggestions that we can add to it in the future, please never, ever, ever hesitate to get in touch with us, of course, at support@denovosoftware.com. I'll type that in over here. We are always glad to, most of the features that came from here actually came from user feedback, and we really appreciate and listen to feedback from our users. Okay, thank you very, very much, and have a great day. This does work on both FCS2 and FCS3 files. although of course FCS2 files are usually too low resolution to do really proper software compensation, but it will work. Everything I showed here works on both of them, given that caveat. Any other questions? Of course, not just if you have any questions about not just compensation or about anything, if you've encountered any problems or there's something that you don't know how to do, or there's something that you're doing that you think is taking you too much time and you're wondering if there's a better way to do it, there usually is. FCS Express is very flexible and has a lot of ways to do different things, and you may not have discovered the best one. So please feel free to send us any questions to support. We just got a question, do you need to turn off compensation from Diva before applying ours? Absolutely not. You can turn off the preferences like I showed and not import that compensation. So if you turn this to none, it won't import the compensation that's in the Diva file, even though it is actually in the Diva file. But even if you have imported that, you can change that compensation with the sliders. So if that file is loaded and you have the compensation that's from the Diva software and you don't like it, you can just right-click on the plot and adjust that exact compensation with sliders, or you could copy and paste that compensation, apply the pasted version to your plots, and adjust the pasted version, leaving the original one alone. You can do whatever you want. We had a question about why do compensation during analysis time. This particular person has only seen people do compensation during acquisition. There's a lot of reasons for that. Depending on what instrument you have, if you do compensation during acquisition, then the compensation is saved with the data. Directly in the data is altered so that the compensation is stored with it. And if the compensation is wrong, there's no way to correct for it. You can't get back to the original data with the mistake. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why people have moved to doing the compensation in software. The other reason is people find just preference. Maybe doing it on the instrument machine time is expensive, and they don't want to sit there fuddling around with the compensation, so they just get their compensation controls and then they do all the compensation offline. So it's sometimes an issue of personal preference, and sometimes an issue of you want to check the compensation that other people did. Sometimes it was done wrong on the instrument and you want to correct it. So there's many different reasons. Any other questions? All right, well, if that's it, I mean, once again, just because you didn't ask a question today, don't let that stop you if one comes up in the future. Please feel free to write us at support@denovosoftware.com. And aside from that, thank you very much for spending looks like it was a little longer than I anticipated, so spending an hour with us today. We hope you learned something and enjoyed the webinar, and we wish everybody a happy weekend and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.